And joining us now for the first of 5 consecutive broadcasts all week here on TVO, Mike Harris, Premier of Ontario from 1995 to 2002. And we welcome you back to that chair in this studio. Nice to see you again.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you and your audience.
We are going to be exploring different aspects of leadership all week long, and you, as a guy who won back-to-back majority governments, would know something of what it takes to be a leader in this society and in politics. And I want to start with life before politics, because obviously a lot of our audience is new. They won't remember that you didn't just show up and become premier. You actually got elected in 1981. So before that, there was a lot. And I want to know, going back to your kind of teenage or early years, whether there was anything in your background that suggested to you, I am destined to be a leader.
I don't think so, but I, you know, as you reflect on it, I suppose there were a few moments. I mean, in the beginning, I had a very strong-willed father who clearly led. He was a small businessman. He led in everything that he did. He you know, when we were in the tourist business, he became president of the association. You know, he was a doer, and people followed him. And by the way, we kids followed him too.
So he was tough.
He was tough, and
Dean.
That was Dean.
Dean
and he instilled, you know, a lot of things in me between he and my mother. Now, I would say part of his leadership was fear, which I don't think is the right kind of leadership.
So
but it worked for me. Yeah, I did. And you know, when you get into different leadership styles, fear is one of them. Bullying is another. And yet I think, you know, my mother was never that way, and yet my mother really led without my father knowing it. You gradually learn these things, and at the time perhaps you didn't even know that. So that was really the early beginnings. Then you know, in the playground, we didn't have a lot of organized activity. I played organized hockey later on.
We should remind people, you're from North Bay.
I'm from North Bay. We all played hockey. Yeah. Outdoor rinks, by the way. You know, we would shovel in between periods, kind of thing, if it was snowing, and that was our rest, if you like.
But were you the organizer? And would you have been the guy who said, "Okay, you're on this team, you're on this team"?
Well, you know what? In the informal, that's what I want to get. You know, we would have pickup games of baseball, of hockey, of shinny, of all of that, and yeah, lots of times, not always, but lots of times, I was, and even sometimes with older kids, and so I didn't think much of it at the time, but in those early days, for whatever reason, hopefully they trusted you to make good decisions. You know, if you're picking teams, for example, you know, you would pick players. So there would be a certain, well, you know, Harris, they trusted me to pick the right player. Didn't always win, by the way. Made lots of mistakes. But but I have to tell you, it was more in hindsight when I look back on that I realized there were some signs of leadership early on.
Didn't feel that way at the moment.
Sure didn't feel that way at the moment. I was a kid growing up, and I had a wonderful, wonderful childhood. I had you know, the early years, the education and the freedom, and I still look back on them very fondly, and I think it's something that our kids have lost a little bit. It's all too organized. We drive them to soccer, we drive them to dance, we drive them to music, we sign them up for all these things, and they're all organized. So one of the things we try and do, we try and make sure our kids have opportunities for unstructured, just turn them loose, see what happens.
Right.
And you see the leader coming through in those.
I want to follow up on the fear angle, because that's very interesting to me. Was it a fear of disappointing your father? Or was it a fear of the belt, or what was it?
Yeah, it was both. It was both. But I mean, ultimately, it was really, early on, I guess it was a fear of the belt, I suppose. And later on, it was a fear of disappointing. There's no question about that.
Did you get the belt from him?
I did, and from my mother. I mean, that was, although, you know, my mother hated it, and of course, she would say, "You wait till your father comes home." I mean, a lot of us of my generation went through that. But the stronger motivator on the negative side was the fear of disappointment. You know, and I think what you learn in life and in leadership roles is that you know, as part of team building, it's the positive aspects of leadership that truly motivates people to follow and accomplish great things.
Now, as you're growing up in North Bay, you eventually get a job as a teacher, elementary school teacher.
Yeah.
And I wondered what opportunities or what kinds of leadership skills you may have learned at that time.
Well, whenever there was something going on in the school, I was often turned to would you organize this? Would you, whatever the day was. We were a new group of young teachers in the school that I was at. It was an experimental school at the time. So we were under the microscope of the school. It was one of these open concept things in grade 7 and in grade 8. Wonderful school, hand-picked teachers. The principal had great freedom to do that. So it was pretty positive. And I took leadership courses. I was only there 1 year, and I took an OISE course on science education.
So you came to Toronto?
I came to Toronto.
Oh, okay.
For grade 7 and 8, and then I initiated meetings with our feeder school, a high school. We started to share equipment, share concepts, and things that should have taken place naturally if you had a sort of a continuum curriculum, from kindergarten through to grade 13 at the time. We kind of manufactured it. So I would take those initiatives, and we were successful.
Now, I guess there's no better opportunity to show your chops as a leader as when you're running a family business, right? So, and you eventually moved into the family business. Can you remind people, first of all, what was the family business at that time?
Well, the first business of my dad was a welding distributorship business. So there I was kind of early years, and then age sort of 14, 15, 16. So I was pretty, a lackey when I worked part-time in that business. Then we bought a tourist resort in developed. So I was everything from dock building or building cottages. We had a restaurant, a steakhouse. And eventually, I was then in charge of the marina as I got older and these kinds of things.
Did you take it over from your dad at some point?
And then, well, I took over no, never, we worked together on that. Then we needed something to do in the wintertime. We got into ski. We developed a ski hill, which I did eventually run. And then we sold the summer business, so my dad could retire, and then I had a ski hill, not making any money, by the way, and I needed other things to do. So then I got a job running a golf course. And
again, are you thinking at this time, all of this is adding to my kind of
they were all
potential as a leader?
Yeah, there's no question. And they at the same time I became a trustee on the Nipissing Board of Education. Within 2 years, they asked me to chair the board. So clearly there were, and then within a few years I was chairing the Northern Ontario Trustees Association. So that was sort of my in those days, politics was your volunteer giving back to the community. But ever since Teachers College and then teaching, I've always had a great interest in education, and that stayed with me all my life. But gradually, there were more and more leadership roles and opportunities, and I took them.
There are plenty of teachers who wish you weren't so interested in education, but that's another story for another program. We'll get to that. Okay, eventually, all of that private sector experience leads you to running as an MPP. You win in 1981 to become the MPP for Nipissing. I guess 4 years later, you were in the cabinet for a little while, weren't you?
I was.
Frank Miller.
Yes, I was. Yeah. I was a committee chair and then a parliamentary assistant, and worked my way up through that progression, if you like. I was natural resources and energy briefly under the Frank Miller administration.
This was right at the end of the Tory dynasty.
That was at the end of the 42-year Tory dynasty.
So you finally made it to cabinet, and then the dynasty
ended.
ended.
It ended.
Not great timing. What do you learn as a cabinet minister in terms of leadership? And the reason I ask is you're in an odd place. On the one hand, you're not the premier, so you got to take direction from somebody else. But on the other hand, you're running a big department. How does that work in terms of being a leader?
Well, I can tell you how it works. But to be honest, I wasn't there that long. I often joke that I spent a third of the time learning what went on in the ministry, so it was all intake, them educating me, and then about a third of the time we had an election campaigning. And then I joke the rest of the third of the time shredding, because we were getting ready after 42 years to turn the government over. But you clearly are part of a team, and while you will have files and areas that are your own. As you get more credibility around the cabinet table, the better job you can do in leading the ministry in the direction that you wish to lead it. But I think it's fair to say, I mean, it was about a 5-month sojourn with an election in the middle and all the shenanigans, if you like, were going on about, you know, the coalition that formed. So those experiences didn't teach me as much. Perhaps as parliamentary assistant, I was with parliamentary assistant Andy Brandt, and he gave me a lot of responsibility. So working there, I perhaps learned more about what you can do, and sometimes you know, the Premier's office set a little different tone than you might have wanted to take, and so you bide your time.
Now, what does that mean?
Well, that means there's some things you want to do that Cabinet collectively or the Premier's office says, no, that's not our priority at this time, and we have other priorities we're going to use political capital on or dollars on that you have to get through Management Board and Ministry of Finance. And that's fair, and you know what you learn from that, if you really think it's important, you go back, and I mean, some lick their wounds and get upset. What I would do and encourage people to do, you go back and say, okay, how can I make a better presentation next time? And there'll be other opportunities. There always are.
In terms of your development, though, as a potential leader of the party, you're in government for 4 years. You're a minister for about 5 months of that.
Right.
How much of any of that helped you become the eventual leader of the PC party in 1990?
Well, immensely, because I learned what it was like to be a soldier. I learned what it was like, you know, in just as an MPP, and I learned those ministers that I thought treated me fairly and those that didn't. And so I think it's an important part of the process. And you know, you saw, you know, when Bob Rae took over unexpectedly, I think to he and his team, he had a lot of rookies, a lot of new people who didn't have that government experience. They had opposition experience, and I think it showed in many areas. I don't want to get into the issues of the day, but he wouldn't disagree with me. And David Peterson, to a certain extent, faced the same thing. I think he expected to win, and he did. But still, they hadn't had that kind of government experience. So it was very beneficial to me, really, 10 years later, and as maybe, you know, as leader of the party. Wasn't quite 10 years before I became leader, but it was 10 years before we won the government back. So in that period, it helped me immensely in getting a caucus and candidates and a team ready and getting them, you know, all on the same wavelength and ready to follow. And so it was of great benefit to me.
We're going to drill deeper in the days ahead on how you became leader and what you did as Premier and that kind of thing. But in our remaining few moments here, just give us a sense of when you got the job as Premier of Ontario, 1995. What did you see as the essential part of the job that you and only you could do?
Well, leaders have to make decisions. I mean, and at the end of the day, I made them. And I think good leaders make decisions, and dithering leaders are not successful. And you see that in business, and you see it in politics. I had the benefit of a lot of research, if you like, a lot of time thinking about what it is we were going to do. But at the end of the day, it's still timing, what comes first, what gets priorities. You know, you know, all the leadership qualities you have to have. I mean, integrity is number one, and you have to know where you're going, and the team has to know where you're going, and they have to be ready to follow, and they have to trust your judgment. You know, I was fortunate enough, because of the preparation that we had done in that 4-year period leading up to the election.
I think you might be referring to this then.
In the Common Sense Revolution, which went out a year before the election. By the way, we thought it was going to be 6 months before. Bob Rae hung on, as you know, by his fingernails as long as he could.
So it turned into a year.
So it turned into a year, but our plan was, let's get it out there 6 months before, let's get it, you know, we'll defend it, we'll get it known and whatnot. So I had the advantage of that. So I was able to take that document the day I became Premier you know, into my staff and into the Deputy Secretary of Cabinet and say, here's the agenda. Now, how are we going to implement it? And I got to say this, you know, the Rita Burek, when we interviewed,
head of the Civil Service,
when we interviewed for this top job, Rita Burek brought a copy of the Common Sense Revolution to the interview. This is before we were even sworn in as government, and said, we can do this. And I could lead the civil service to help you implement the Common Sense Revolution.
And that's how she got the job.
And that's
eh?
how she got the job.
That's how she got the job.
And she did.
Never
She
knew
was
that
good.
story.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. We're going to do 4 more over the course of the rest of the week. So, Michael Harris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.